thousands of feet up in the Alps.
I've seen it from the top. It's really high up.
A 5,000-year-old murder victim frozen in ice. Now, investigators use science to retrace his final journey
The hunter became the hunted.
and unearth who his killer was.
That's the final piece of the puzzle for me. I know exactly what happened.
Murder is a crime as old as time.
We've got the skeleton here. What can the bones tell us?
In some cases,
We've got a crime scene at 10,000 feet.
That's interesting.
have been unsolved for centuries.
It's a mystery.
He had his knees sticking up like this.
You have here his head.
Now, archaeological geneticist Professor Turi King
It tells us something about our past.
and top homicide cop Rod Demery
I've seen hundreds of murders, and it's all about putting that puzzle together with the evidence.
are finally unearthing the truth
So this could be an axe? Sure.
buried in these ancient mysteries.
Whether it's now or 1,500 years ago, I still want to know what made this person do what they did.
Professor Turi King is in the Italian Alps, on the trail of Europe's oldest unsolved murder, Ötzi the Iceman.
So I'm really looking forward to this story because Ötzi the Iceman, incredibly famous archaeological story. I teach this at university.
Named after the Ötztal mountain range where he was found. The frozen body of Ötzi was discovered in 1991.
Encased in a block of ice. He's Europe's oldest mummy.
And while many scientists have studied the Iceman, no one has ever truly solved the mystery of his 5,000-year-old murder.
So it's going to be really interesting to see, is there anything new that turns up? And what perspective Rod's going to bring to this?
Louisiana homicide cop Rod Demery is already getting a feel for a place that couldn't be further from home.
Looking around the mountains, the landscape, this place is natural. I mean, the beauty, the water. I don't think it's changed a lot since Ötzi's time, and I think it's gonna help a lot with the case.
Turi's heading straight to where the body was found.
We've got a crime scene at 10,000 feet. That's extraordinary. So I'm gonna go meet an archaeologist called Andreas, and he and I are gonna go and see the site.
But this is no ordinary archaeological site. Located on Italy's border with Austria, the crime scene is inaccessible by road and about a 3.5 hours hike from the nearest village. So Turi is being taken to it by air with archaeologist Andreas Putzer. This landscape has changed little in the last 5,000 years. As altitude increases, the meadows in the valleys give way to subalpine forest, and then to snowy peaks.
It is really beautiful.
Yeah.
And the crime scene itself is even more remote.
In 8 minutes we are on the exact spot. There, straight ahead.
A ridge 10,500 feet above sea level. So rugged, it would be difficult for the helicopter to land.
The find site is down there. Now, straight on this rock.
The body, face down, was revealed by ice melt during an unusually warm summer. Today, a memorial marks the spot.
After the discovery, around my rescue team went up and they recovered the body.
A body so well preserved, rescuers thought it might be a modern climbing casualty. But later analysis revealed the glacial conditions had created the oldest fully intact human mummy ever discovered in water or ice.
After the ice conserved him for the last 5,000 years. The best way to preserve organic material, so that's why we today use freezer for our food.
Yeah.
The conditions might explain how the victim was so well preserved. But why he was killed, and why here, remains a mystery.
So this feels like quite an extreme place for a murder. I mean, it's really remote.
Back on the ground in the nearby city of Bolzano, Rod is keen to cast a fresh eye on the case and is enjoying the challenge of investigating historic crimes.
Yeah, I'm really excited to investigate these ancient cases. To know that the same type of case exists, 5,000 years ago, is pretty fascinating.
The team meet in their temporary incident room, a mountain chalet near Bolzano.
Rod's going to be coming at it with his techniques that he normally uses. And I think it's going to be interesting to hear what Rod has to say on this.
Applying Rod's modern-day police techniques will be a new approach to this murder, which has been carbon dated to around 3200 BC.
To put this into perspective, he had been dead on that glacier for 700 years before they even started to build the pyramids.
Wow. This was the Neolithic Age. And Ötzi was living in a time of transition. People had started to cultivate crops and domesticate animals. But most still got their food and clothing from hunting and gathering.
So, why are we here? Is this a murder?
It's definitely a murder. So originally, when he was found, they thought that maybe he just died on the mountain, hypothermia. But then 20 years ago, the researchers found that he had an arrow in his back.
Only revealed by scans, the single stone arrowhead would have hit a main artery. A clear cause of death.
Shot in the back with an arrow on a mountain. Two good clues.
But there's been 30 years of research done on Ötzi and still no idea as to why he was murdered. So I think we should go and have a look at him.
Let's go.
Ötzi's remains are held in a special display chamber in a museum in Bolzano dedicated to Ötzi.
So he's in here.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Most ancient mummies were prepared by removing organs and adding preservatives to the bodies. But Ötzi was preserved by the cold and ice, making him the oldest natural human mummy in Europe. The chamber replicates glacier conditions, continuing to preserve the victim.
He's like a giant freezer, so it's set at -6 degrees Celsius. And yeah, it's 100% humidity, essentially to preserve him as much as possible.
Wow. It's interesting tattoos on his
Yeah.
body.
Each tattoo is positioned above joints where injuries or strains are most common. Scientists now think Ötzi's 61 tattoos were some form of Neolithic medicine. For Rod, seeing the body is always an important first step of any investigation.
When I see a dead body at a crime scene or a murder victim that I'm investigating, I see it as evidence. I see it as something that I need to bring some closure to.
As well as the victim's body, the museum also has some of his clothing. A tunic made of domesticated sheep and goat hides. Shoes that would have been insulated with grass. A bearskin hat. All of which bring the victim to life for Turi.
I do feel this when I'm working with archaeological remains. These are individuals. They once had parents, possibly siblings and children, and you want to understand what happened to them. I think that's part of being human.
Ötzi also had various possessions. They include a backpack, birch bark containers, likely used to carry warming charcoal embers, a dagger, an unfinished yew-bow, arrows and a quiver, a copper axe, and a pouch of tinder fungus for making fire. All suggest that Ötzi was on some form of journey relatively far from home. Archaeologist Andreas is on hand again to give some context.
He had everything that you need to stay for a few weeks on the mountains.
What did people do on the mountain there?
Still today, the hunters go there to hunt the ibex. I'm convinced that he was up there for hunting.
The alpine ibex is a wild goat that lives at high altitudes. Ötzi may have been hunting ibex on the day he died. But what happened next is a mystery.
So something happened on the mountain where the hunter became the hunted.
And it's not the only clue Rod has picked up on.
How far were his clothes in possession from his body?
Only 2 meters from the body.
The movement of ice over millennia meant that most items had moved slightly away from Ötzi's body. But one item seemed to be still within reach. A weapon.
Now the dagger, it was on the right or the left side of his body?
On the right side.
Right side. Okay, so it was near his hand.
Yes, the dagger was found close to the hand. So maybe he had the dagger in his hand.
It suggests that Ötzi might have had his dagger drawn at the moment he was killed. Turi wants to get a closer look at the lethal arrow wound on the body. She has arranged to meet a member of the preservation team, Dr. Martina Tauber, who has a full-size 3D scan of the victim's body and his injuries.
We are dealing with a body more than 5,000 years old.
When Ötzi was first discovered, scientists thought he died naturally, or of exposure on the high mountain slopes. It wasn't until 2001 that a blemish on the X-rays on Ötzi's left shoulder was revealed to be an arrowhead.
It's quite a small one. It's only 2.6 centimeter long.
It may have been small, but it was lethal.
Ötzi is likely killed by an arrow to the back.
It's with high certainty that the arrowhead is the cause of death.
So is it going to have killed him right away?
If you take also into account the environmental setting, and we are talking about more than 3,000 meters above sea level, he might have survived 15, maximum 20 minutes.
Scientists next set about finding the entry point and discovered a 3/4 inch cut in the skin on Ötzi's back that matched the arrow's trajectory.
So does that say something about the position of the attacker relative to Ötzi?
It's possible that it was shot from below or whilst leaning over.
Rod's on the trail of a suspect. His 14 years as a homicide cop have given him unique insights into how to solve crimes.
The most important thing when investigating a crime was finding witnesses. Victimology was a big thing for me. I used to find out everything I could about the victim. The first witness you talk to on a homicide is the person who saw the person last, or the person who found that person. But then the next witness would be someone that knows that community or that history.
With a definite cause of death and a suggestion of the killer's position when he fired the fatal shot, Rod wants to find out more about hunting and archery from the time.
Oh, hi.
He's meeting Neolithic weapons expert Jürgen Junkman at the Valsenalis Archaeopark, a museum close to where Ötzi was found. Ötzi was killed by an arrow, shot from a bow.
Is this a tool that most grow up with and they become experts?
They began at a very small age, maybe 2 years or so. We know of kids' bows, so they began at a very early age, and by the time they became adult, they were very good archers. They could walk, so they could
shoot a bow.
A bow. Everybody could shoot a bow, but not everybody was a good hunter, because not everybody has good eyes. Today we have glasses, but at that time they didn't exist.
It's believed Ötzi would have lived in a village that had a good water source and terrain suitable for the farming of animals and crops. But he also went hunting.
Bows and arrows, are they for strictly hunting or are they used for self-defense?
They can be used against humans. And they were used against humans.
But how much skill would the murderer need to make that shot?
Now, what type of power, speed, accuracy did these bows carry?
Well, the range is probably from 50 pounds to around 90 pounds of draw weight. And the speed that you can get with an arrow like that is 120 to 140 kilometers per hour.
Wow.
Which is more than enough power to kill a man.
The arrow would have been traveling between 75 and 87 miles per hour. Its force would have been determined by its weight, speed, and the draw weight of the bow that shot it.
Now you can probably shoot up to 30 meters quite precisely, but everything more would be a lucky shot.
So that's pretty impressive. 30 meters is a pretty accurate shot.
The position of the entry wound in relation to the embedded arrowhead suggests the shot was fired from a position lower than Ötzi's shoulder.
So with Ötzi's wound, to achieve that type of trajectory, do you have to be in a different shooting position?
I would need a crouching position. In hunting, you do not shoot like that, but you normally hide behind some bush and maybe shoot like this.
Position of concealment.
It's no problem for an experienced archer.
Rod has his first suspect.
Ötzi's probably a hunter, because most are in those days, and he had hunter's equipment. So it's a possibility that he may have been a threat to someone else. Someone may have wanted his resources. He may have wanted someone's resources, or at least they thought so.
It's someone that wants to occupy or take what someone else has. They view that person as either weaker or maybe someone that has more than they have. If you kill them, there's no chance of retribution. They won't come back at you.
There's a real possibility that the person who killed Ötzi could be a competitor, fellow hunter.
If someone is coming in to take someone's territory and they're able to fend off that person by killing them, then they've succeeded in maintaining their territory and their power. I don't think the threat ends there, though. I think that's always going to be the desire of one man for another man's property.
A rival hunter makes sense. They would have had an arrow like the one that killed Ötzi. But if they were competing for resources, why didn't they take Ötzi's many useful possessions? Turi is wondering if Martina can help reveal the answer by explaining the other injuries found on Ötzi's body.
We have injuries on Ötzi's head. Once on the forehead. And as you can also observe, the right cheek and the forehead area has a dark discoloration. It's have been caused by falling, hitting his head.
So that's at or around the time of death, we think?
Yes.
Okay.
The head injuries fit with the picture of how Ötzi fell. He was struck in the back and fell forward, hitting his head as he landed. But there was another wound that seems unrelated to his dying moments.
Here you can see it clearly. It's a deep, irregularly shaped wound on his right hand between the thumb and the index finger. And it goes from the palm to the back of his right hand and almost deep to the bone.
So how old is that injury?
A tissue sample was taken from the cut.
The sample was tested for hemosiderin, a compound that often forms after bleeding, and also hemoglobin, that would indicate the presence of a blood clot. The results showed how long Ötzi had the wound before his death.
Biochemical and histochemical analyses identified coagulating blood and hemosiderin.
Okay.
Suggesting that it was inflicted a few days, 3 days before his death.
That's going to have been very painful. He's going to be in a bit of trouble there.
Yes, definitely, yes. Ötzi wasn't able to use his hand properly anymore. It was for sure life-threatening for him.
What's more, Martina is convinced that the injury wasn't accidental.
What could have caused that?
When you look also the position, it's a classical defensive wound.
So that's not self-inflicted. That's not from him cutting skins or as part of hunting.
No. As you can imagine, an opponent attacks you, then you try to defend yourself and protect your head. And sharp weapon enters in your flesh.
3 days before his death, it appears Ötzi might have been in a fight and been badly hurt. This would have been particularly bad if this was Ötzi's dominant hand.
Do we know if Ötzi was left or right-handed?
We know that Ötzi was right-handed because on his dagger, for example, and also other pieces of his equipment, fresh marks was identified from resharpening and repairing from a right-handed person. So yes, Ötzi was right-handed.
That's amazing you can tell that now, 5,000 years later.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
Definitely, yeah.
The fact that Ötzi is right-handed may seem irrelevant, but small details can be crucial to a murder investigation. Jürgen can point out something on Ötzi's arrows that could be crucial to the investigation, and it's to do with the fact that Ötzi was right-handed. His quiver had 14 arrow shafts, but only 2 were properly made and ready to fire.
The 2 finished arrows that he's got are probably made by 2 different persons. It's about the winding of the feathers. And the one was probably wounded by somebody who is right-handed, and the other one by somebody who's left-handed, and he turned it the other way around.
Right.
And also the other arrow is longer than his quiver, so it didn't fit inside.
It didn't fit inside the quiver.
So it was definitely not his own arrow that he made.
An arrow made by a left-handed person suggests to Rod that right-handed Ötzi may not have been hunting alone, and that perhaps he was with someone who became murderously tired of his company.
Murder usually involves somebody that you know, or somebody that you have some sort of relationship with. And people that kill people that they work with may have had a dispute. There's always some sort of close relationship, everyday interaction that can bring it to a boiling point.
Maybe he's on a hunting trip.
you know, with people he knows, friends he knows. They're kind of just chasing game around. Now, we know he has an injury to his hand, so maybe he's, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of argument, dispute, kind of spills over. So maybe it's a moment of rage. And it would have to be maybe someone he knew.
Rod's experience tells him that passion killers rarely steal items from their victims, making it more likely that his killer was a companion, not a competitor.
There may be some sort of resentment there. Maybe something that just happened quickly. They left him right where he was and got out of there. I believe passionate murders happen because you're around somebody that you think is absolutely normal and they're not. And at any given point, their anger can blow to a point where they kill somebody. I think it happens more often than not, actually.
Rod needs to learn more about the community Ötzi lived in to understand who else might have had a grudge against him. Sylvia Tumler demonstrates Neolithic life at the Valsenales Archaeopark. She's worked here since 2019 and is very familiar with the life Ötzi would have lived.
Wow. People like Ötzi spend a lot of time in mountains.
Yes.
But do you think they were in settlements too?
Yes, I'm pretty sure they have some family or a family clan. Some had to go in the mountains for hunting, or maybe being a shepherd, or for getting herbs and
trading.
Yes.
Kind of like now, you know, some people live in the country and they go to the city to.
Yes.
Yeah.
These settlements focused on making clothes and tools and farming.
They grew wheat and vegetables, salad, herbs in the garden, and they still were hunters.
And hunt for the meat?
Yes, for the meat and for the skin of the animals.
But of all the everyday things that Ötzi had in his possession, a small dagger, a leather pouch, bows and arrows, there was one item that would have made him stand out from the rest of the hunters in his community.
Maybe Ötzi was some kind of chief because of the copper axe.
Copper axe.
Because it's a very rare material at this time. And he was quite old for this time.
Right.
He was in the middle of his 40s, and it's really old.
So Ötzi may have had some status.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
To find out more about the copper axe, Turi is meeting Professor Albert Zink, one of the world's foremost experts on Ötzi.
This copper axe was not only an instrument, but also something very expensive at these days, and not everyone had one.
Ötzi lived around 3350 to 3110 BC, the end of the Neolithic or New Stone Age. This is when people started to smelt tin and copper to make tools and weapons. The copper ore in Ötzi's axe came from southern Tuscany in Italy, suggesting his people had trade links further afield. We don't know if Ötzi traveled to get this metal or if the traders came to him, but one thing is certain. Ötzi's axe was groundbreaking for its time, heralding the beginning of a new era, the Bronze Age. But what did this mean for Ötzi?
The copper axe was actually the only thing made out of metal. We could assume he had a higher social status, but there are a lot of open questions around him, to which community he belonged, and whether he was really a leader or just somebody with a somehow higher social status.
The fact that such a high-status object was left with the body is a puzzle.
It's not theft, because somebody would have taken the axe, surely.
It's quite surprising because I also would have expected that if somebody has killed him, he would take away this axe. An explanation for that could be that somebody didn't want to get exposed. Sometimes people are killed with the pure intention to kill the person and without any interest in his belongings. So the main goal is to kill him and then go away and leave everything like it is.
For Rod, the presence of a status symbol like the axe points towards a power play that is all too familiar in his work.
There's a possibility that Ötzi's high status by the axe, the rarity of it, it being something that was very coveted at the time. And the person who killed him may have been high status as well. I think the fact that Ötzi was shot in the back at a considerable distance is probably indicative of Ötzi being a very capable person. And the person who wanted to kill him wanted to sneak up on him. They didn't want the fight, they didn't want the trouble. Just get in, get out, one shot, one kill, it's over.
Ötzi's high status meant that he could have been a leader. Examination of his thigh bone has revealed he was around 45. Old at a time when it's thought the average life expectancy could have been between 20 and 28 years old. Perhaps someone else wanted to take over. Someone skilled in the art of killing.
A trained killer, there's no passion, there's no emotion. It's very precise. When you see someone that's been bludgeoned or beat, stabbed several times, that's passionate. If you see someone with a precise injury, professional.
Back in the incident room, Rod and Turi meet to discuss their findings.
What can we rule out?
Well, I think it's clear that it's not a robbery. We have a bunch of items that are left with Ötzi, particularly the axe. If you look at this axe, and you're just getting to the Middle Age, right? This is a valuable item. It's like the Ferrari of its day.
Yeah.
It kind of makes you think there's really no other motive other than just to kill him.
Yeah.
There's no gain of value. Now, here's the other thing. We know that Ötzi's a hunter.
He would be ready for close combat because he's got a knife and he's got an axe, but there's no way he could do anything from a distance because he's not got his bow.
He has a bow, but his bow's unfinished. Someone creeped up on him.
The really interesting one for me, he's got a really bad injury on his right hand. It goes right down to the bone. So he would not have been able to use his hand, and it's about 2 to 3 days old.
Yeah, it's really interesting to have a defensive wound. That means there's some sort of physical conflict. And I think the thing is, Ötzi's at 10,000 feet on a mountain.
It's a long way to go for somebody to go up there to kill him.
So the trick would be to figure out why.
Ötzi's body was found at 10,500 feet, around 6,500 feet higher than the likely location of his village. Turi is hoping science can help her track Ötzi's final journey into the mountains.
One of the really interesting things you can do these days is pollen analysis.
Archaeobotanist Dr. Klaus Ogel has analyzed plant protein found in Ötzi's body.
If you're eating bread, you're consuming pollen, but also by breathing the air, there's always pollen of the environment around. So they tell us something about the environment where he stayed.
Just like all alpine areas, the Ötztal Alps have a tree line, the altitude where trees stop growing. Beneath it, arboreal or tree pollen dominates. Above it, grass or herbal pollen is more common. Since Ötzi was found above the tree line at over 10,000 feet, Klaus expected to find mainly herbal pollen in his system,
So Klaus, what kind of pollen are you finding?
The major pollen has been arboreal pollen.
Not only was the majority of pollen from below the tree line, it was well below.
More than 50% came from the hop hornbeam.
Hop hornbeam is a tree in the birch family. In this area, the hop hornbeam only grows at altitudes of up to around 4,900 feet, at least 5,000 feet below where the body was found. So Ötzi had covered some distance in the hours prior to his death.
We have the hop hornbeam now just right behind you.
Oh, wow.
Not only could the pollen in his system determine the height that Ötzi was at before his death, but it could also tell Klaus when he was there. Because the pollen would have traveled through parts of his digestive system within certain time frames.
We have a time sequence of around about 33 hours to 55 hours before he died.
Because that's how long it takes to go through the digestive tract.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So Klaus was able to deduce Ötzi's altitude during the last 2 days of his life. But he could go further. By mapping where the plants that produce the pollen grow, he could also suggest the route that Ötzi may have taken.
We could see precisely that he traveled through different vegetation types.
Trace elements of 75 mosses and liverworts were discovered in, on, or around the Iceman, all dating from his lifetime. A third of them grow below the height at which he was found, and were most likely to have been carried up with him.
According to these moss leaves he had ingested, we could reconstruct that the most plausible way which he took up has been the gorge.
Klaus's team mapped where mosses grow across the region. They found that the ones connected with Ötzi still grow in the Schnallstall Valley today. Comparing their map with each moss pollen's position in the digestive tract, they could suggest locations for Ötzi at certain times in the 2 days before his death.
So it's like you've got a plant GPS. You've got not only a timeline, but a location as to where Ötzi is at a particular point, essentially.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
This is a plant GPS.
Yeah,
it's a
great.
good idea.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Ötzi's most likely last movements had been revealed. Now Rod and Turi want to see for themselves the route he actually took. They enlist the help of drone pilot Peter Santer to fly through Ötzi's final journey.
So it's really incredible. We actually know Ötzi's last movements. So we don't know quite where he's starting from, but we know it's in the tree line at about 8,000 feet.
The pollen found near the end of Ötzi's digestive system was consumed around 33 hours before his death. This reveals that at this time, Ötzi was at least 19 miles away from the crime scene, near the southern end of the Schnallstall Valley, and around 8,200 feet up near the tree line. He could have been at any of these 4 points on the valley sides.
We know that then he's following all the way along the valley floor, and that's 12 hours before he dies.
Ötzi is now well below the tree line, at an elevation of between 3,200 and 4,900 feet. This is an area of broad-leafed, deciduous forest, including hop hornbeam trees.
And then slowly it starts this climb.
The pollen that was in Ötzi's small intestine shows that between 4 and 7 hours before his death, he was back in an altitude of between 5,900 and 8,200 feet. He's moving further up the valley, where dwarf pines and spruce forests grow.
This is the last bit, apparently, just before he gets up to the top to 10,000 feet.
Yeah, it just looks dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it from the top, and it's really high up.
Yeah, incredibly steep climb, I think.
Yeah.
Now, in the final hours of his life, Ötzi is climbing up to over 10,000 feet to the scene of his death. Here, the terrain is much more treacherous.
Yeah, you know, from a tactical standpoint, you know, you have all sorts of routes to evade people. You have all sorts of concealment, a lot of rocks for cover. Definitely evading someone.
Yeah, he's on the run.
With 250 murder investigations behind him, Rod has seen how far many killers will go when motivated by personal rage.
If you're looking at people who commit murder and why they commit murder, that doesn't change.
So maybe it's a personal feud. You know, someone would have to have a really good reason to follow him up that mountain.
In Rod's experience, there's one very good reason why a killer would go to such lengths to kill another person.
The first assumption, because we have someone found dead, is that that person's a victim. Not necessarily true. That person may be the villain. In fact, they may have hurt someone really badly. Whoever that person was, someone came to avenge their death.
Rod and Turi return to the incident room. They're still trying to make sense of Ötzi's climb up the mountain.
That journey is just incredible.
It is, and it's in the last 12 hours of his life. So this is not going to be an easy journey to make.
And I think when we talk about his hand injury and the time frame, it could have happened here at 8,200 feet, but probably more likely at 4,000 feet. There are people in the valley. There are people in this little village here. It's possible that he got into an altercation here. I think maybe something happened and he was trying to get away.
Without evidence, the team can't pin Ötzi's murder on any one suspect.
There's one more piece of scientific analysis to explore. Maybe understanding Ötzi's diet and health will help us figure out what's going on here.
The science has shown that Ötzi made a very strenuous journey. He was an experienced hunter, likely familiar with the terrain, but not a young man. Microbiologist Dr. Frank Meixner and his team investigated Ötzi's health. They began with his final meal, extracted from Ötzi's stomach. The contents were rehydrated and examined under a microscope.
So we have here the stomach content.
When did he have his last meal?
Yeah, actually shortly before he died. So this is also quite surprising. So he had a big meal. The full stomach was completely filled actually. And this material, yeah, it was chewed, but it was not yet digested.
Magnified multiple times, the team could discern undigested fibers of plants and meat. Testing these for proteins, lipids, and DNA, they discovered that Ötzi's final meal included ibex and red deer meat, along with wheat and trace elements of bracken fern, which he may have wrapped around his food to carry it.
That's not somebody who's on the run, who's eating little bits on the go. That sounds like a full meal. It tells you a little bit about what his mindset might have been.
He was pretty comfortable.
I mean, the fact that he's got a full stomach.
And to feel secure and safe enough to stop and actually have a meal.
Yeah.
This would seem to indicate Ötzi was feeling better about his situation, possibly believing he had reached a place of safety. But the research team also found some bacteria that may have made him anything but comfortable.
Yeah, we have the stomach pathogen Helicobacter pylori, which can cause gastritis or even more severe diseases.
Is it possible that he suffered from this?
He would be ill and definitely had stomach pain, yeah.
And this wasn't the only condition Frank's team found.
He suffered of atherosclerosis, actually. So if he would not be maybe been shot by an arrowhead, he would have had a heart attack, actually.
Atherosclerosis sufferers have a buildup of plaque in their arteries. This causes thickening and hardening, making it difficult for blood to flow.
So he's basically got heart disease.
Altitude affects the heart, and this condition would have made his climb even more difficult.
If he's got this heart disease and he's going up a mountain, wouldn't he feel the effects of it? Maybe shortness of breath?
It could be that he already had some symptoms.
Scientists also discovered signs of arthritis in Ötzi. The tattoos on his body may have been some form of acupuncture treatment.
It sounds like Ötzi was in bad health.
Yeah, you know what? And that's the final piece of the puzzle for me. I know exactly what happened. I think with historical murders, it's really challenging because there's really no way to verify. The challenge is matching up all your evidence with what you have and telling the story. From the evidence that we have, this is completely interpersonal violence. It's nothing but that. The fact that there's nothing taken.
I also would have expected that if somebody has killed him, he would take away this axe.
There's injuries.
It's a classical defensive wound.
The cuts on Ötzi's hands indicates there was a fight. There was a knife fight. He probably killed someone a few days before, and someone came to avenge that person's death. There's hot pursuit. I think when he leaves the valley floor and goes back up to the mountain, he is looking for a safe place of refuge. He was not in the greatest condition. I mean, his heart disease, his arthritis, his injuries, he had to have needed to make that journey. That's a key piece of evidence.
He would be ill and definitely had stomach pain.
I think in a survival mode, he takes the most difficult path, the one most cover, most concealment. He doesn't believe anyone's going to follow him. Maybe he was going to make better weapons. Maybe he was just going to rest and come up with a new strategic plan. He may have gotten to a point where he thought he was safe because of the route that he'd taken.
He had a big meal.
I think he thought that person or persons would be discouraged from following up that mountain. But no, someone was determined. I think the killer used very good tactics. You know, the best way to do it is to get in, get out. Sneak up on them. They don't know where the shot's coming from. There's a saying, the military saying, if you heard the shot, you weren't the target. And I think that explains Ötzi's situation. He never heard the shot. It was clear that the goal was to kill Ötzi. That determination in doing so is what was key for me. This wasn't about anything other than murder. No. This wasn't about possessions. It wasn't about theft. It wasn't about territory. It was about revenge.
Rod believes Ötzi's murderer was a revenge killer.
I think investigating Ötzi was an incredible experience. In that the science was so fantastic.
The pollen and the plant analysis, that was absolutely fascinating. The fact that you can use that almost as a sort of a GPS to give you a really amazing picture of what was going on in the last couple of days of Ötzi's life. I mean, I think that's absolutely extraordinary, at 5,000 years distance.
What was interesting is that you can see the story from where he was, where he ended up, some of the injuries that he had until his final death. If you were to take away the fact that this happened 5,200 years ago, you would think it happened yesterday.